Thank you. 15 feet. That's how far I'm sitting behind Prince Andrew. I'm so sorry, sir, we've just met. You are now my Prince Andrew. I hope you won't hold it against me. It's November 2019, Buckingham Palace. For those of you unaware, Buckingham Palace is the home of the King, and Prince Andrew is his errant brother. He is what we might call technically in the trade an absolute living nightmare for King Charles, and reputationally a huge problem for the royal family. And I'm sitting just 15 feet behind him. The reason? Because he has agreed to do an interview about allegations, first of all against him, of sexual assault and rape, which he vigorously denies. It's the lawyer in me, I can't take the risk, vigorously denies. And also about his friendship with two prolific sex offenders. First of all, Jeffrey Epstein, and second of all, Ghislaine Maxwell, still incarcerated, Epstein now dead. Why on earth would a member of the British royal family agree to do an interview with Emily Maitlis, who at the time was the most famous and ferocious broadcaster in the United Kingdom, in Buckingham Palace for almost 50 minutes about the allegation of rape and about his friendship with a prolific dead paedophile? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sam McAlister, and I spent a year of my life negotiating that interview. An interview which, to be frank with you, on our sandy shores, I never, ever thought he would say yes to. Why on earth would you take that risk? Why would you put yourself in that position? What's so interesting about this particular interview is that everyone always says to me straight away, well, this is not a story for me. I would not put myself in that position. But I'm afraid all of us are a very short space away from this kind of risk in the current climate. You are one X tweet away. You are one LinkedIn post away. You are one moment when someone in your company or something happens online, as you guys know better than anything, from being in the public gaze. You may not be a Prince of England, but you may end up in trouble. And this is the story of how that trouble came about. 13 months prior to sitting that 15 feet behind him, and by the way, superficial observations, the carpet, red with swirls, a little bit worn, nicer than my house to be clear, I do not live in a palace. Second of all, Prince Andrew, new haircut, I can only see the back of his head. Ill-fitting suit, he has a lot of money, it's just an observation. And also shoes, unlike me today, slightly scuffed, and tapping on the carpet floor for the 48 minutes that he put himself through the most excruciating media interview the BBC has certainly ever seen. And spoiler alert for those of you who did not see it, it did not go well. It is, in fact, what we call in journalism parlance a shit show. Newsnight, the program that I worked on, had never, ever had an interview with a member of the royal family, and I can assure you it never, ever will again. And in relation to my personal risk, I count myself lucky that I live in the United Kingdom. Because in other countries, let's be frank, my friends, I would be at least 6 feet under for my part in this tale against the establishment. A little person. I'm not putting myself down. You can tell I'm a woman with a lot of confidence. But a little person, a nobody, a minion, a tiny member of society up against these massive institutions. But I am so far so good, here to tell the tale. All of this started 13 months prior. It's the case that my story became a Netflix movie. I do apologize for the horrible name dropping that I will now have to do. But when I first spoke to Gillian Anderson about appearing in my movie, she said, so, Sam, tell me, how did this begin? And I'm afraid my story just starts with an email, how so many modern stories do. And this email was 13 months prior to this interview. At this stage, Prince Andrew was kind of in risk range, probably about a 3 on the riskometer. That's just my own riskometer. He was an annoying member of the royal family for his brother. He was someone who had had some dubious friendships. He was no longer in the public eye, but he was kind of a problem prince, not a pariah. An email came in, and the suggestion was that on Newsnight, the program I worked on the BBC, which does geopolitics, economics, all of the thorny subjects that we love to get our teeth into, the suggestion was that he came on and did an interview. But the interview was going to be what we call a puff piece. That means we go, "So, Prince Andrew, tell us about your charity." And then 7 minutes in, when we want to ask him about the actual things that matter to the great British public and the global public, he goes, "Sorry, is that the time?" And off he goes. We do not do interviews like that at the BBC. They do not happen. Well, not on my watch. And so the interview was declined. To be honest with you, my team weren't very interested in interviewing him anyway. They considered him an uninteresting individual. The only source of interest was this friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, which had been somewhat forgotten. But as often the case with risk, it changes very quickly, imperceptibly, or perceptibly. And in this case, things changed a lot for Prince Andrew very quickly. Fast forward to May of the next year. Usually you never hear back from people when you turn down an interview. I explained we don't do interviews with conditions. I asked them to get back in touch if Prince Andrew changed his mind. Surely he would not. But something did change. And in May of the next year, I am invited to Buckingham Palace. Now, my job on Newsnight was basically getting bums on seats, providing opportunities for people to take a massive risk or to have the massive joy, depending on how you look at it, at coming on this program and being cross-examined live or pre-recorded on the foremost difficult program the BBC had at the time. In this particular situation, I'm now going to go to Buckingham Palace to try and persuade Prince Andrew to do this interview. 99% of my job was rejection. You have to have a pretty thick skin. And so my assumption was that it would be a flat no. So I did not even tell my boss that I was going. And off I went. Now, I kind of treat it a bit like a tourist day. So I had my phone with me, and I assumed, incorrectly, that the second I got inside the palace, the phone would be taken away. Spoiler alert, ladies and gentlemen, it was not. So I'm afraid this is the only classy photo. And in my defense, I thought these photos were just for my mum. I did not realize this was going to become what it became. And so when I was in the drawing room, which is just here on the side, waiting to meet Amanda Thirsk, played by Keely Hawes in the movie, his chief of staff, ex-City, ex-Oxbridge. She had spent 7 years working with him. She was loyal, clever, neat, and brilliant. As I waited there, they hadn't taken away my phone, so it's a tester shot. It's probably the same trousers, but I have cleaned them, to be clear. No one came in. No one rugby tackled me. No one tasered me. No one took me to the house, to the Tower of London, and executed me. And so I continued. Sadly departed, the Queen, if anyone's unaware. And still, I continued. No one came in. Very nice furniture. And then this is the really, really bad shot where I look very déclassé. But as I said, it was just for my mum. Okay, I did too. It's a confession. The meeting happens, and unbelievably, we get to the end of the meeting, and Amanda Thirsk says to me, okay, he's now willing to do a more broad conversation. 3 hours of negotiation in. The negotiation was an interesting one because we're both doing opposing things. She wants to protect Prince Andrew, and I want to expose him to risk. How do you find a place in the middle? The truth is, you find it in psychology. The psychology of this situation is that she thinks he's amazing. That's the job. Many of you who have powerful positions will have people around you who tell you that you're amazing, and that can unfortunately expose you to massive risk. He was in a situation in which he'd been told he was amazing for 59 years. Sounds superb. A driver, no job, no 360 assessments, nothing that you have to do in terms of securing your income, and certainly no worries about even money because he doesn't even carry any. In that situation, we get to the end of the negotiation, and she says, okay, he's willing to do the interview in a more wide-ranging way, but there is one condition. No surprise. The condition is he will not speak about that random, irrelevant friendship with the serial paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And so I have to turn down the interview again. At this stage, things really start to go wrong in this relationship between the prince and the paedophile. Epstein is arrested. He's indicted. I'm a criminal defense barrister by trade. It's a very long indictment. He's going away for a very long time. In the cells, he dies. Let's leave that there. No one has time for that. And then Ghislaine Maxwell, previously probably sunning herself in the south of France or completely forgotten about, the FBI is now very interested in apprehending her. And now the FBI, and indeed my team, who had rather poo-pooed the idea of a Prince Andrew interview, are sensationally interested in interviewing him. So how do you convince a prince to give an interview about a dead paedophile and his friendship, some hinting at very intimate, with another who is awaiting trial on such serious charges? You show patience, you show resilience, you communicate openly and honestly, and you never give up. May, I asked to see her again. It's a no. June, July, August, September, October, no, no, no. My job is somewhat of a thin line between resilience and harassment, so you do have to be careful. You can really pee people off by just emailing them too often, messaging them too often, alienating them. It's crucial that I don't alienate this woman. We trust each other, we've been open and honest with each other, we have a pre-existing relationship, and trust, after all, is the foundation of any business conversation. Finally, in October, the email I cannot believe I get. Would I come back to Buckingham Palace? Hell yes. And so I take my presenter with me, who's played by Gillian Anderson in the movie, Emily Maitlis. We're smuggled in effectively. We go and we spend another 3 hours with Amanda. Things go well, but surely they cannot say yes to this. It feels like an impossibility. But we get to the end of the next 2.5-hour conversation, and I turn to Amanda and I ask a question I never usually ask. I teach negotiation at LSE, and I tell my students, never think about the other people, just concentrate on your own case. But in this one occasion, I have to ask, is this real? Or is this just what we call a beauty parade? You know, Prince Andrew and Amanda don't have much to do, they want to bring some journalists in, it's a bit of fun. Is it a cat with a mouse? Or is this a real opportunity? And Amanda says, we are going to do an interview, but just one. I'm barely breathing. Emily Maitlis is barely breathing either. We cannot believe this might be a possibility. And I have that in. 12 long days later, the longest 12 days of my life, we get a message on the Sunday evening. Can we come to Buckingham Palace again on Monday to meet Prince Andrew in person? This never happens. In my 15 years negotiating interviews with everyone from Elon Musk to Justin Trudeau, via Sheryl Sandberg, or various celebrities, you never get to speak to the primary. He or she does not meet you. They don't want to meet you because you're just a minion. They probably don't have time, and they don't want to take the risk of saying something that could put them in difficulty. Those are 3 good reasons not to meet someone. But instead, on the Monday, we go to the palace. Emily and I almost fall over curtsying. I'm not very good with deference. You have to call him Your Royal Highness the first time and Sir thereafter. I'm not very good at saying Sir either, but I try my best. And Prince Andrew comes bounding around the corner to meet us. I hope you don't mind, he says. I've brought someone with me. I am thinking lawyer. Game over. In the 13 months that I negotiated with the palace, speaking as a lawyer, I expected I would meet a lot. You will not be surprised to hear that during those 13 months, I wasn't even CC'd on an email with one. 0 lawyers. Thank God. No lawyer would have let this interview progress. He says, I hope you don't mind, I've brought someone with me. Well, when you're in Buckingham Palace, about to talk to the Queen's favourite son about allegations of rape against him, with your boss and also with your chief presenter, you don't really have a position to say no. The person he has brought with him is his daughter, Princess Beatrice. So now we have to talk about paedophilia and rape in front of his baby daughter. Not literally, but always a baby to him. This is really an unprecedented situation as far as I'm concerned. How do you talk about such delicate matters? The answer is, you tell the truth. I don't know how many other people were negotiating with the palace. I've had lots of people write to me telling me that they were after this happened. But at the time, the only thing I really have on my side is chutzpah, energy, integrity, the relationship with Amanda, and telling the truth. We spend about 2.5 hours in that room. During that period, Prince Andrew tells us things that I thought would never make it into the public domain. If you have seen the interview, there's a very famous part where he talks about how he couldn't have done this particular crime because he was photographed and talked about as being very sweaty, and he gave the explanation that he didn't have any capacity to sweat at the time. He also gave an explanation that he had an alibi, that he'd been at a Pizza Express in Woking, so he was unable to have got back to London and committed the crime alleged against him. I never thought the world would hear those things. In that room, he said them to us, just inches from us, and he took an astonishing risk that day. The astonishing risk was to tell that to 3 journalists he'd never met in his entire life, and had he not agreed to do the interview, those stories would have gone to the grave with us. We would not have said a thing. That was a good risk to take. The next morning, we were waiting to hear what had happened. I was particularly trepidatious because about halfway through the conversation, if you've seen the movie Scoop, which is based on my life story, about halfway through, we got a really good rapport. I'd been honest and open with him. I have a slightly more ballsy, chatty way of negotiating than other people. And he asked me the question, so Sam, if you were me, would you do this interview? That's a quite unusual question to ask someone who is negotiating to do an interview with you. But I gave him the honest reply. The honest reply is simple. Sir, if you are telling the truth, if you think the public will believe you, if you didn't do it, and if you have a credible explanation and a way to apologize, you should do the interview 100%. If you don't, if you're guilty, and if you don't think the public will believe you, you 100% should not do it. Honest advice. Less than 12 hours later, he said yes. We did the final negotiation on Monday. I don't know whether Craig David translates over here in Finland, but he's a popular beat combo. We did the absolute yes on Tuesday. We were meant to do the interview on Wednesday. We ended up doing it on Thursday. And there I am, 15 feet behind the most cataclysmically bad interview I've ever seen in my entire journalistic life. And of course, I took pictures. This is just before the interview started. That's Emily, the presenter on Newsnight. That's the back of Prince Andrew. That's Amanda Thirsk, the chief of staff, who I'd done all the negotiations with. And to be clear, after all of this went down, we were on such good terms that we remained friendly. Friends might be pushing it, but friendly. And she could have ruined my life, because the risk I personally took in this negotiation is that I'm a tiny minion. I'm working part-time for an organization as a junior producer. If they had wanted to ruin me, they very, very easily could have. And so far, they haven't. I believe that's down to the way the royal family behave in general, but particularly down to Amanda, who has never briefed against me. Just as the 48 minutes is about to start. You might think, and if you have a chance to go back and watch the interview, that when you've done an interview this bad, that means that effectively you get sacked by your own mother, that your royal career, such as it is, comes to a crashing end, that you, a former war hero, are now a pariah, that you lose everything, really, that you were hoping to restore, that the conversation you thought you would have with the public went terribly and horribly wrong, you might have had an idea that it did not go well. Here's the picture at the end of the interview. Emily looks like we've shot her dog. To be clear, we have not. And Prince Andrew looks like he's won the interview lottery. And that really is the moral of the tale here. Risk depends upon self-knowledge. It depends upon not being deluded about your capacity. He truly believed that this was an opportunity, which it was, if he had spoken differently, if he had given a proper explanation, if the public had believed him, if he had been credible to them, if he'd had the knowledge to understand the way that the public perceived him, perhaps in the court of public opinion, he could have been in some way exonerated, in some way returned to his former life, in some way have said sorry for the association with Jeffrey Epstein, in some way said sorry to poor Virginia Giuffre, now sadly departed, who made these allegations against him. But instead, it was a shit show, and this is not the face of a man who understands that. So please, when you're taking risks, make sure you don't do a Prince Andrew. You understand the risks that you face, you make decent calibrations, and you do not have this level of delusion.